Hi, everyone, and welcome to my talk in KCD Lahore. Super excited to give this talk. It's been a long time coming. Congratulations to all the amazing efforts being done and that have been done by the organization team to get this event moving. It's no joke to create an event that over 1,000 people register for. And there's a lot of planning that goes on behind the scenes. So if you're in the audience, I'd like to take this opportunity to give a round of applause to all the people that have organized. If you can say thank you to them, that would be great. I think in Urdu it's shukriya. I'm not sure about Punjabi. I also forgot to say salam alaikum. Salam alaikum, everyone. Welcome to KCD Lahore. My name is Bart Farrell, and I will be giving this talk called The Next Decade of Kubernetes Insights from CNCF Ambassadors. All right. This talk is quite practical. You don't need to have a crazy technical level to understand it. It's basically just sort of a case study of going out and speaking to different people in the community, but we'll get to that in a second. If you have any questions about the talk, or if you'd like to know more information, you have my name right here. I'm very easy to find on the CNCF Slack. And also, I'll share my LinkedIn and Twitter information at the end. So let's just jump right in, okay? Let's see. So, who am I? Just for a little bit of background about myself. My name is Bart Farrell. As I mentioned, I'm originally from the United States, but I've been living in Spain for the last 13 years in the north, in a city called Bilbao. And in terms of my profile, it's not the most typical profile you'll see. I come from a non-technical background, and one of the projects that I'm most actively involved in right now is a podcast called Cube FM, which is also going to be one of the sources. It's a primary source used for the topic that I chose for today's talk. It's a podcast, but I'll explain more about that in detail later. I've been a CNCF ambassador since 2021. That seems like a long time. And I got involved as an ambassador through the Data on Kubernetes community. I'll explain that in a second. Another thing that I do is I'm the local organizer, one of the local organizers here in Bilbao for the CNCF Bilbao meetup. That we have a local meetup where we get together every month to share different ideas, problems, have conversations about different cloud native technologies that people are using. I'd like to know more about the local meetups going on in Lahore as well as other parts of Pakistan where people are getting together and sharing ideas. It's a wonderful way to get to know each other and really grow as a community. The Data on Kubernetes community, I was leading that from 2020 to 2023. And it's a community that's focused on making it easier to run stateful workloads. So let's say database storage. We could also be speaking about streaming analytics workloads on Kubernetes, traditionally thought of something as being quite complicated or challenging. This community was started in 2020 in order to address those issues so that engineers wouldn't have to suffer through the difficulties that perhaps they would have had they been alone. Right? The whole idea of community is very, very important here. People coming together to share knowledge. I've been fortunate enough to be a KubeCon speaker on 5 separate occasions, speaking about different topics ranging from the Humans of Cloud Native series, talking about different ways that people can contribute that are non-code based, things of that nature. I've also happily been involved in being a co-organizer for KCD Guatemala, KCD Islamabad, and also this year for KCD Lahore. Obviously, unfortunate that I can't be there in person, but I think it's been organized and done with a lot of positive energy, a lot of passion of getting people together to show all of the talent, all the amazing things that are going on in Lahore and the local community. So I think it's amazing. I'm also a musician. I play guitar, bass, drums, and I started making hip hop beats about 7 years ago. I've always been very passionate about hip hop music, and you'll probably see a rap that I created for the event, in which I try my very best to speak Punjab, but I hope that you'll be a very forgiving audience and know that it's the intent that goes behind it, not necessarily the execution. But it's something that I've brought as well too to the Kubernetes ecosystem when I was in the Data on Kubernetes community, and since then have written a lot of raps without the use of ChatGPT about the different technologies that people are using as a way to celebrate that and also as a way to combine something that I like very much, which is music, and in this case hip hop specifically, with something that's more related to the community. I'm also an amateur boxer. I've liked martial arts since I was a child. I was a child a very long time ago. I'm 38 years old, but I've been practicing different forms of martial arts for a long time, and nowadays I do boxing. And last but not least is something that's very important for me is I believe in people, no matter where they're from, no matter what their background. I think that everybody deserves a chance, and it's incredible what can happen when you do believe in people, when you give people that gift, and it's something that's very, very important to me. So 10 years of Kubernetes, all right? You saw that in the very first title, the first slide. And, it's 2024, so Kubernetes got started in 2014. What was, just for trivia's sake, unfortunately, I can't interact with you directly, but just to test your knowledge, it's okay if you don't know. But what was, Kubernetes originally called at Google? So Kubernetes was originally a tool that was used internally at Google. And back in the day, it was called Borg, all right? Some of you may be too young to have watched Star Trek, but Star Trek, there's an entire like race of people in Star Trek that are called the Borg. And there's an inside joke backstory about that in Google. You can read about that online. Also, a bit of trivia: Kubernetes comes from which language? Let's see. It comes from Greek, right? So Kubernetes in Greek means the helmsman or the pilot, right? The person who's like navigating a ship. That's where that comes from. For more information, though, if you haven't done so already, it doesn't matter if you're a beginner or super veteran Kubernetes user. I would highly recommend checking out the Kubernetes documentary, which you can find on YouTube. It's totally free. There are 2 parts, and you get a lot of really helpful backstory on the context from which the context in which Kubernetes was born. Right, the different sorts of the technological conflicts, or we can say competitions, competitive races that were happening there around the cloud. If we look at the different cloud providers, the need for better technologies around container orchestration. Kubernetes is not the only technology that's a container orchestrator. Very famously, there's a technology called Apache Mesos. I'll mention that in a bit. But like I said, really, really good documentary. Highly recommend checking it out. Doesn't matter what your level is. It's accessible for everybody, and it's very, very helpful. But just thinking about this context, right, of here we are in 2024, 10 years since Kubernetes was started. And in a lot of ways, we're often thinking about Kubernetes in the context of technologies like Linux. Do you know how old Linux is? Well, Linux, I think, recently just celebrated its 33rd birthday, right? So it's 23 years older than Kubernetes. But thinking about how technologies mature, how they go from a sort of Wild West phase to then becoming easier, more adopted, not just by cutting edge startups, but let's say by more traditional industries or industries that might be, reluctant to change or resistant to change. Eventually, these technologies become commonplace, and is what some people say, become boring. Boring in the sense of more predictable, easier to use, not so much of a steep learning curve, things of that nature. All right, let's keep moving. And in my personal case, because everybody has a Kubernetes story, right? All of you have a Kubernetes story. Can you think about the first time that you heard about Kubernetes? The first time in my case was in 2018. I was working at a British startup, and I happened to have my desk placed next to the DevOps team. I was working as a talent manager at the time, doing things related to organizing events, also internal knowledge management, things of that sort. And it just so happened that my desk was put next to the DevOps team. And so I was hearing about all the different technologies they were using. And in 2018, they mentioned that they were going to start using Kubernetes. They've been using Docker up until that point. And that's where I said other technologies that were around then, such as Apache Mesos, but they ended up going with Kubernetes. And it's obviously become the de facto standard since then. 2020 to 2023, continued my experience with Kubernetes in the Data on Kubernetes community, like I said, focused on range stateful workloads. And, through other projects also in the CNCF ecosystem, working with different startups, but now, primary focus in the Kubernetes ecosystem in my case would be the podcast KubeFM. We're now working on our 4th season. We have episodes coming out pretty much every week, so you can check all that out, but we'll explain that a little bit later. But I really am curious, think about your journey. How did it start? Who was there in the beginning? How did you first hear about Kubernetes? What was the situation perhaps in a company where you realized, I think the current situation, the current technologies we're using is not going to be able to provide the value that we need. We need to look into alternatives, and Kubernetes perhaps came up as one of them, right? But think about that, right? What have you learned along the way? What are things that if you could go back, you would tell yourself, right? If you had to go back in time, what would you tell yourself? Like, hey, if you're going to start with Kubernetes, make sure you learn this, right? These are the things I want you to be thinking about, right? And also, of course, generally speaking, in a learning journey, there are people along the way. Who has been instrumental in your journey, helping you learn, helping you grow as an engineer and as a professional? Really important to keep these things in mind, right? Good. Now, in terms of what is KubeFM, it's part of the Learn K8s network, right? So it's all about training, helping people get better with Kubernetes. And there are other, we can say branches of the Learn Kubernetes network. One is Kube Careers if you were looking for a job. There are jobs that are exclusively, focused on for Kubernetes engineers and that are all over the world. Kube Events, a way to find out about different events that are happening, whether they're online or in person. But in terms of Kube FM, the core focus really is technical content written by technical people, right? So we don't have someone coming on and just speaking about a product per se. We have someone coming on and we have engineers coming on speaking about their experience, the problems they've solved, and how they've solved them, right? Without trying to push any sort of commercial agenda, right? It's we had this technical problem. We had different options in terms of how to solve it. This is how we did it. And in terms of the topics, we have a lot of different topics that are covered. You can see some of the titles here, but there's a full, like I said, a full range. But one of the things that we decided to do in order to celebrate 10 years of Kubernetes was to do a Kubernetes series, right? So we did about 30 interviews, interviewing CNCF ambassadors from over 20 different countries. And the format was pretty straightforward, right? So we decided a couple of questions that we were going to ask them. There are lots of different, Kubernetes is very large. So when we're talking about Kubernetes features, there are many, many aspects about it, right? Technical as well as non-technical. But what's your least favorite Kubernetes feature, right? Because let's face it, there are going to be some features that we like a lot about Kubernetes or the Kubernetes ecosystem, and others that we would hope, would change. And so thinking about the present, then the second question, looking forward towards the future, what do you hope for the next 10 years of Kubernetes, right? So currently, if we're in 2024, how do we imagine, ideally, the Kubernetes will be in 2034, right? It seems like a long ways away. I will be 48 years old. Oof, wow, I'll be old. But most of you will probably not be that old then. But what I'm saying is thinking about, the next steps that will be taken, right? And, identifying the first part, don't be a part of the problem, be a part of the solution. If there's a feature that you don't like, what are you actively doing to try to change it, right? Are you interacting with, the maintainers of a certain CNCF project, perhaps, that can make some improvements there? Are you raising awareness about this? What are you doing to try to make this better? And like I said, looking forward towards the future, what are the things that would need to happen to have that ideal future that you're hoping for? So in terms of the responses that we got, in terms of least favorites, sorry, need to adjust this slightly. There we go. In terms of least favorite features, there are some sort of classic ones, but then there are, ones that are a little bit more niche. So in terms of least favorite features, one of the things that was mentioned time and time again, and remember, these are CNCF ambassadors who responded to this, overall complexity and learning curve, right? The amount of time that it takes to become proficient at Kubernetes. If someone says they're a Kubernetes expert, what does that actually mean? Can you be a Kubernetes expert? Is it possible to know absolutely everything there is to know about Kubernetes? But it's one of the things that people will frequently mention, that in order for me to know this, I need to have learned that. To understand this, I need to have learned that. So that then becomes a bit taxing for some people, or a bit challenging, that they need to organize their learning journey so that they don't feel that they have to learn everything all at once, right? But that these parts are interconnected. And so to have, we say, don't miss the forest for the trees, to try to have a more global vision of it and not getting bogged down in just a particular area, or trying to figure out exactly what they do need to know and perhaps other things that aren't absolutely essential. Another one that was frequently mentioned, networking and network policies, right? So network policy management. We have a podcast. We did a particular podcast episode about this in Cube FM, and it's come up in other conversations I've had. But a lot of people find the networking aspect to be quite challenging, right? There have been some improvements, and there are ongoing improvements being made in different areas. But like I said, it's something that people identified. Another one, resource request limits. Sorry. Another one that was interesting was CRDs, custom resource definitions. Some people did complain about it, saying that they felt that it made it unnecessarily complex or tedious. But then other people have talked about how CRDs are their absolute favorite feature on Kubernetes. Like I said, of course, there are differences of opinion. Our sample, we didn't interview 20,000 people. But it is interesting to keep in mind that some things that one person may not like, for another person can be absolutely fantastic. Ingress. Ingress was frequently mentioned. Luckily, with the work that's being done on Gateway API, it seems like a lot of the pain points of Ingress should be put to rest. But that was something that was mentioned quite frequently. Interestingly enough, in my particular case, having been in the data on Kubernetes community for 3 years, hearing about how writing stateful workloads in Kubernetes was very challenging, doing things like backup and restore. It was interesting to see that that's still a pain point for a fair amount of people. But I'd like to know about you. What about yours? What's the thing that you found most challenging about Kubernetes? It could be anything, but I think it's good to identify it and know that you're not going to be the first person to say, "Oh, this is really difficult for me." Other people are probably suffering from a similar pain point, and those are people that you could probably connect with to get ideas about, "Hey, what resources might help me improve?" Okay? In terms of the learning curve, and that's exactly what I want to address here. How have you learned Kubernetes? There are lots of different ways to do it. You have to figure out the best way that it's going to work best for you. Is it blogs? Is it books? Is it podcasts? Is it contributing to a CNCF project? Is it docs? Is it going to meetups? Is it the CNCF Kubernetes Slack? What's it going to be? Right? Everyone has a different learning style, so it doesn't mean that you have to do one or the other. You need to do the one that works best for you. But the point is, you need to find something out there, because just hoping that you're going to get better at this or that it's going to get easier probably won't take you very far. Okay. Then for the second question, when we asked about the future, people reference this about a platform for building platforms, sort of paraphrasing a quote from Kelsey Hightower. If you want to look more into that later, Kelsey tweeted about that, I think, more than a couple of times. Like I said in the beginning about Linux becoming more boring, right? The Kubernetes will become something that's not so wild and crazy, that becomes a little bit more under control. Another thing that, becoming more user friendly, that it doesn't require as much pain to get started. Other people said this is also related to least favorite features. No more Helm. That is design is fundamentally flawed. Also have a podcast interview about that. More automation, but more automation, partially related to that as well too. A fair amount of comments around AI and ML becoming ever present in the Kubernetes ecosystem, but in what way, right? I think we can all agree that there's a big boom on AI and also machine learning right now, but how can we actually see that on the ground? There is the AI, artificial intelligence working group in the CNCF. If you're interested in that, that's a very good place to find out about the things that will be happening. I believe they've written a white paper. So like I said, that's a good resource. But it's anybody's game, right? It's anybody's guess, right? What's going to be happening in the next 10 years? A lot of that will depend on the people that stay in the community, right? This is, community driven. So depending on the kind of community that we're able to cultivate, the kind of people that we're able to bring together, the local communities that we're able to incorporate as well through meetups or through events such as this one, like KCD Lahore, these things will be absolutely essential, no matter what happens with all the other technological parts. So yeah, now pretty much getting towards the end. So thank you very much for watching my talk today. If you'd like to connect, if you'd like to know more about the things that are going on in my area of the Kubernetes ecosystem in the CNCF, please reach out to me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. It would be an absolute pleasure to speak to you. Once again, massive shout out to the KCD Lahore organizers. Thank you for your hard work. I really hope you're enjoying this event. A ton of work has gone into making it happen. So please tell all the volunteers, staff, and organizers, thank you very much from me, as well as from all the other folks who are speaking. It's been a pleasure to participate in this, and I look forward to interacting with all of you soon. Take care. Cheers.